Thank you, everyone, for joining me today, and I'm blessed and honored to have as my special guest, Elizabeth Yore. Thank you for joining me, Elizabeth.
Oh, my pleasure, Joseph.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know, I think most Catholics know who Elizabeth is, but in case some of you don't, here's a brief bio. Elizabeth Yore is an attorney and international child rights advocate. She served as child advocate and special counsel at the South African Leadership Academy for Girls. She was the general counsel of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. She received her BA from Georgetown University and her JD from Loyola University Law School in Chicago. Wow, two Jesuit schools.
And I survived. I'm still a Catholic.
You did. How was it when you were in university?
Well, back in it was changing. I had one priest who taught theology at Georgetown, and the rest of the students really made fun of him. He was an elderly guy, and so it wasn't a very good time. You know, the faith was really totally disintegrating. There was no promotion of the faith at Georgetown. So, you know, it was in certainly law school, even though it was a Jesuit law school, there was no sense of it being a Catholic law school, in my opinion.
No, were you born and raised Catholic?
Oh, yes. I went to Catholic grammar school, all girls Catholic high school. And I was the oldest of 6 children, hence I'm in child advocacy. So, and grew up in Chicago. Yeah, that's been a cradle Catholic all my life.
Wow. I want to specifically talk to you about the issue of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, because that's something that you focused on and that you've written and talked a lot about. There's 3 articles that I'm going to talk about, and as always, I link them in the description to this video so people can read them. The first one I want to talk about this was an interesting one you wrote, and it was during the lead up to the 2018
Synod?
The Synod on the Youth. Yes, thank you. And here you wrote something. Yeah, I mean, you're a very good writer, but when you want to make a point, you make it clearly, succinctly, and you don't beat around the bush. You just, well,
it takes hours to do that. Thank you, though. Thank you.
But you just say it. There's an openness and an honesty about what you've said on this issue that I don't see a lot in the Catholic Church. I mean, I see it more from the laity. It's non-existent, I would say, from the hierarchy, and pretty rare from the clergy. You wrote, "Here is the dirty secret that is now emerging. Many in the hierarchy were active homosexuals who intentionally relaxed and ignored the Church's teaching and moral stance on homosexuality. The personal wreckage brutally portrayed in the Pennsylvania grand jury report is the direct result of a clerical culture which embraced homosexuality and groomed, recruited, and assaulted young people into this sordid lifestyle. Many priests, bishops, and cardinals practiced what Francis preached. Who am I to judge?" I want to give a little background for people, and you can do this better than I. 2018 was such a pivotal year in terms of this issue. It was the PA grand jury report, the McCarrick revelations as well.
Yeah, it was there've been a lot of pivotal years, and having worked in this field, I feel like, there's a lot. There's 2002, there was 2006, and of course 2018 probably blew everything wide open.
And I'm sorry, and the first Vegana letter.
The first Vegana letter, which was in August of 2018. I remember being at a wedding, and all of a sudden my phone was going off like crazy. And I'm, reading his testimony, and I was just shocked because finally someone was stepping forward and speaking the truth. And so, and I guess I should step back. There are kind of some pivotal moments in my life that focused me on this issue. One was when I was general counsel at the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. We had a major clergy abuse scandal in the Archdiocese of Chicago, which the DCFS investigators, and as general counsel, I was involved in it, investigated a young Irish Catholic priest in Chicago living in a parish in a Black neighborhood. He had abused a number of young 10 to 12, age 10 to 12, Black boys who were in this Catholic school. Cardinal George was the Archbishop of Chicago at the time. And as a result of that, Joseph, I ended up, well, we had a battle that played out in the press with the Archdiocese. This priest was protected. He continued to abuse children and then finally was arrested and charged. But as a result of that experience, which was horrific, I spoke to 50, 60, 70 victims of clergy abuse, mostly men from the ages of 30 to 70 who had been victims of clergy abuse in the Archdiocese of Chicago or throughout Illinois primarily. And so in talking to them, as a Catholic, and many of these guys were talking about priests that I knew, that I grew up with, that were in parishes that I grew up in. It was just a horrific experience. And, I learned that men are much more honest and open and frank about what had happened to them. So I was reeling about the things that were going on right under our noses in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And, it was a parish on every corner, the German parish, the Irish parish. It was a very tightly knit community, very Catholic. And so that was, and then I had this battle going on with the Archdiocese of Chicago that did not want to take the necessary steps to ensure that children were protected, to really go beyond the Dallas rules. And so it was a 2-year, really torturous, really I questioned my faith after going through this. But it confirmed in me, I was, I tell the story that I went before the tabernacle in just a rage after about 6 months of listening to these stories and hearing the pain and suffering. And, and I would often ask these men who were testifying, who else was there? Is there another witness? Well, Bobby was there. And I said, well, can I talk to Bobby? And Bobby had committed suicide. And so that happened quite frequently as I was questioning these guys. I'd hear stories about young boys, who were, and they would all say the same thing to me. And they would say, Liz, I was the best athlete in 7th grade. I had straight A's. I was the most popular kid. And then Father so-and-so abused me and stopped going to school, started doing drugs. The floor fell out of my life, right? So it was story after story. That was the theme that I was hearing time and time again. And I recognized in a way that I hadn't before, even though I had followed it, that the spiritual abuse is, and the soul murder that goes on when priests abuse boys is the complicating factor that we don't have in the abuse that I would see at DCFS, with whether it's father on daughter, uncle on niece, that kind of thing. So it was all of that, and I pulled through that and became even deeper, and a deeper prayer life, a realization, and I think you could appreciate this, that I, in my own way, because, we all fall away from the church, here and there, not our, we have to view the church as if it's our family. And we have to protect the church as if it was our family. And I, for a number of years, didn't view the church as my family, to protect it, to nurture it, to speak out. And so that was kind of my defining moment where I realized that I had to pay attention to what was happening in my church, no matter how awful it was, and to do what little I could. So that was in 2005, 2006, that I left DCFS. I still was involved in a lot of, pro bono work, as well as working, in South Africa in a big big sex abuse case. Then I decided, when Pope Francis was elected, he was talking about an issue that I cared a great deal about, and that was human trafficking. And so I went in November of 2013. I went to the Vatican to the first human trafficking conference sponsored by the Pope. And it was right inside of the Pontifical Academy. 80 people were there.
How do you get invited to something like that?
I'm not going to give you my. And I couldn't participate. I was, I just observed there. I went and attended, but it was a small enough group that, it was international people. And I walked in, and it was like I was at a UN conference or an Obama conference. There were Obama people, radical UN people. I knew one person there, and he turned to me and he said, "Are we the only pro-lifers here?" Which was shocking to me, because here I am right next to the Vatican Gardens. I mean, in a Vatican building. The Pope comes to meet us in this group. We go down to Casa Santa Marta. And since he was early in his pontificate, he spent some time with us, about 20 minutes. And I have to say that my soul was really rattled. And my gut was telling me something was wrong, but I wasn't trusting my gut. He came out, spent 20 minutes with us. I was able to observe, personally met him. And I wasn't getting that, soul to soul connection, that, you would expect you would get. I mean, and I was blaming myself. Maybe it's, not in a state of grace. Maybe it's me. But I was so rattled that I realized, and kind of made a promise to God, that I was going to study and investigate what was going on in the papacy. So, so as a result, I'm following the synods, I'm following his pronouncements, I'm following what's going on a daily basis in the Vatican. And sure enough, those things that were rattling me, for example, at a human trafficking, where I'm waiting for discussion about the abuse of children and the trauma that they, and what happens, what causes this. And I'm hearing about climate change, and I'm hearing about global minimum wage. Now it all makes sense, right? 7 years later. Oh, now I know why they were talking about that. That makes a lot of sense. That it was a globalist agenda, not, a child-centered agenda. So anyway, that's where I began to start writing about what I saw. And in the beginning, he was the Pope of Mercy, he was.
Right, I recall that, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I had to, because of this other experience, I had to speak the truth. And I felt like it was a blessing that I went to the Vatican, although I was really unnerved. And so I began to really study all the players and, the Cardinals in the United States. I mean, and I had a good sense of who was who. And of course,
did you feel like that issue was being used as a cover for another agenda?
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Because they were, for example, they were saying this is when I was like, this is nuts, that there is a connection between human trafficking and climate change. Oh, really? Is that right? Is that right? Having handled human trafficking cases in the city of Chicago and around the country, mean, I was like, so this is what is done. They take real issues and
Right.
bootstrap them to phony issues, right? And so anyway, but still I kept testing kind of my gut and my instinct and what I was seeing and hearing, and just kept on digging and digging. I went back to the Vatican 2 years later with right before he wrote Laudate Si, his environmental
Mhm.
and encyclical. And I went with these 7 scientists from the Heartland Institute. These were guys who had put men on the moon, worked at NASA, climatologists from MIT. I said it was like 6 or 7 geniuses and me at this conference, because they were trying to get the Pope to sit down and talk with them to hear the other side of the climate issue. My issue was, this is about, climate change proponents are all about population control, right?
Oh.
And mine is, and Jeffrey Sachs was there, and it was all the Soros brain trust that was becoming embedded in directing the agenda of the Vatican. In addition to, the Cardinal Farrells and the McCarricks and the whole, China agenda. So I had heard about McCarrick, as in my, probably early 2000, had heard about McCarrick, and it was just kind of dropped, like, McCarrick, really? And
You had heard claims
that
of sexual abuse.
yes, yeah. So it was
But that
clear.
seems to be typical, that a
Yes,
lot of people before supposedly anybody in the hierarchy knew were already talking about it.
exactly. I don't know how he got away with not having his, lights punched out. I mean, the man was everywhere. And, and I do a lot of writing about him and speaking about him. And I recently got the, it was kind of a yearbook, but I would say it was a book of everything that he did with the Metuchen Diocese. He was the founder of the Metuchen Diocese, the first bishop there. And it was his, I don't know how many years, 2, 3, 4 years he was there, maybe longer. And almost a daily account of his life in Metuchen. And I have to tell you, Joseph, it was just knowing now what we know about him, is just reading that he, at his first mass, he asked every parish in the new diocese to send 10 altar boys to the inauguration mass. I mean, those are the things that you just, with new eyes that we all have. Or he was always, inviting seminarians and, to, in talking about his success and vocations and, and so it's all, it's, if you were to read it 20 years ago, you think, what a guy, right? This is really, and even his homilies, talking about the Blessed Mother and, so anyway, that's how I came to write these articles and follow the synod. I call the synod on synod, S-I-N, the nod to sin. And of course, Cardinal Farrell, who was put in charge of the synod on the youth, Cardinal Farrell, who was roommate for 6 years to Cardinal McCarrick. So
And claims he didn't
yeah,
know
did you see
anything.
those videos? I mean, those videos I would use, if I was teaching investigators to see how somebody's not telling the truth, his videos where I knew nothing. Anyway, and of course, when I see that they're bringing all these young people to the Vatican, to legitimize homosexuality, under the cloak of mercy, under the cloak of love, it just enrages me. And so
I want to talk to you about that. Yeah.
yeah. So okay. So anyway, long story. That was my long story to get why I started writing about this pontificate.
The thing that kept coming to my mind when you were talking about how you got, so involved in this issue is that infamous interview with Cardinal Kupich, when
Uh-huh.
he said that,
Uh-huh.
the Pope Francis doesn't have time for any of these
Yes. Not
issues
going down that
of,
rabbit hole.
of sexual abuse. He's got other problems like global
Climate
warming.
Yeah, yeah, like global warming and climate change. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Um, so when things like that are said, Joseph, there hasn't been any change. They've become more sophisticated, about how to cover up, how to use the
Well,
media.
they've moved on. I mean,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
2004, Archbishop Gregory said the sex abuse scandal is history.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. They've moved on. And I've talked to in one of the articles. There was an article today. I think it was Rod Dreyer talking about the pipeline from South America, Latin America into
I
that.
ask you about some of those.
And so having talked to these young men who are seminarians,
Right.
and that they say, oh, no, we've moved on, everything's fine, we have all of our principles in place, we report to law enforcement, blah, 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 blah. These immigrants are coming in dependent on cardinals and bishops for their livelihood, for their visas, for their future in the United States, to have a car, to have a parish, to have their salary paid. And so they are even more under the thumb of these predatory bishops and cardinals in a way, and they come from a culture where they don't talk about it. They don't call out their elders.
Elizabeth, I was born and raised, here in the Bay Area, and I lived much of my life in the Diocese of Santa Rosa. I don't know if you remember that case with Bishop
Yes,
Zeman.
yes, it was
In,
a bit, yeah.
it was one of the first. It was 1999. He had gone, I forget where, to Latin America, ordained someone as a priest, and then came back to the United States, had a sexual relationship with him. It involved money, as a lot of these things do, and
Always
then
do, right.
it all blew up. So that's and 1999 was the year that I had left the gay community and was returning to the church.
Oh,
so
geez.
can you imagine?
No, I can't. Because Santa Rosa, which a lot of people don't realize, was really the pit of depravity, for the church. That's where it all happened. It wasn't just him. I think there were a lot of cases there, as I recall, because was it Bishop Vasha was supposed to come in and clean up this.
He's our current
mess. Yeah. And I think it's, generations, it's still a mess, or was a mess anyway when he came in. So I can't imagine, but, knowing, we kind of come from, the crisis of the faith coming from different directions, and you want a place to land, and you find that the place to land is not safe.
Yeah. One of the things, that paragraph that I read from this article you wrote, it's packed, but one of the things you tried to connect a lot of things in this paragraph. One of you did is the sex abuse scandal and the relaxation or ignoring church's teachings on homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And see, part of my story and part of the story of a lot of survivors that I've known is that played a part, where people were either, the issue of homosexuality came out in conversations with the priest about whether you were born gay, God made you gay, that gay is okay, the church's teachings are, either wrong or going to change eventually. Right. And that was part of the grooming process. So that's part of my story. And one thing I wanted to say, I guess backtrack a little bit, we should say, that people might not know, is in the John Jay report, which was the official commissioned by the USCCB, the Catholic bishops, they found that 80% of the victims,
almost 82%,
of the victims were male. Mm-hmm. A majority of those were post-pubescent.
11 to
Not to say,
14 or
yeah,
something.
that women and girls were not abused,
Right,
but
but primarily, I mean, overwhelmingly, yeah. And, there's a side story, Judge Ann Burke was on that report. And she brought kind of the demands, what needs to be done in the church to the Vatican. And the head of the CDF was Ratzinger.
mm,
And she had brought these, lists, the recommendations on that things that needed to be changed to other cardinals in the dicasteries of the Vatican, and gave her 20 minutes, She brings them um, to Ratzinger. He has his entire staff, 20 people around the table, listening to her for 2 hours. And he asked her point blank, what are the things that need to be done? She gave him the 5 or 6 things. And he turns to his right hand, Monsignor, and says, make those things happen. And Anne said that nearly before she left Rome, most of those were starting to be put in place. She felt she had a serious, attentive hearing by Ratzinger. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting story. I've studied the John Jay report, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. And, from my evangelical friends who have looked to the church for the truth, to step up and, tell the truth about homosexuality and uphold the Catholic truths about and teachings on sexual morality. This backpedaling has been very difficult for them because, truth be told, they rely on the church to take the big hits, to take the hard stands. And this backpedaling has been, really just eroded so much of, the morality teaching in the Christian faith, because the church has really abandoned it.
yeah. And I read material from the gay press, and I read
Oh yeah.
stuff from, and I read things from critics, and I don't want to scapegoat gay priests, as you
Yeah.
call it, but at least I'm willing to explore the connection, because I think it's there, between homosexuality and the priesthood, and then like you mentioned in the article, a laxity
Mhm.
of Catholic morality, specifically dealing with homosexuality,
Yeah.
and how those all interconnected into the abuse scandal. Because like I said in my story, I know they did, and I know in other people it did as well. And I don't want to take too deep of a dive, but it's been an issue in the Catholic Church, because in 1986 there was this CDF document to the bishops, I think specifically of the United States,
Yeah.
but for the pastoral care of homosexual persons. And it got kind of infamous or famous because it used the term intrinsically disordered.
Yeah.
But, and I've said it over and over again in my podcast, mainly what that document was about was warning Catholic bishops about LGBT ministries that had popped up in the
Yeah.
church, and were pretty much, by the mid 80s, were well established since
Yes.
the 1970s, like specifically, like say, like Dignity,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
had dignity masses and all this stuff.
Thanks to Joe Bernardine, our former
Yeah,
cardinal.
and a lot of the Jesuits, John J.
Yes.
McNeil, in his
Yeah.
book The Church and the Homosexual, and
Yeah.
so there was this environment within the church of gay affirmation.
Yeah.
And in the San Francisco Bay Area, I grew
Oh.
up in that.
Oh. Really?
Yeah, I sure did. And I want to talk about this in a little bit, but I think that was smart of in '86 for the Vatican to tell the bishops, knock it off.
Yeah.
It not only does it go against Catholic teaching, but I think it sets up an environment that's toxic, and I think it's liable for abuse to take place. in those environments.
Well, Joseph, what I didn't realize back then with that directive was that, you know, the horse had left the barn. You know, they weren't just saying you have to teach. I mean, there was active, you know, homosexuality and grooming and recruiting into the seminaries. None of us knew. Right? I mean, certain people knew, but you know, the vast
It was
majority.
it was a reactive document. It certainly wasn't.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. It had already taken place. And I think as I've looked into it, how the bishops reacted to that document, I think they performed a sleight of hand. A
Uh-huh.
lot of them, you know, kicked out dignity masses, no
Yeah.
longer had them, but
Yes.
then Bernadine was one of them. Then they established their own LGBT
Yeah.
ministries,
Right.
which in the diocese or within the parishes, a lot of times
Yes.
utilizing the same exact people
Uh-huh.
from dignity
Uh-huh.
into those ministries. So absolutely nothing had changed. It was just
Nothing
it
to,
was a
or they,
rebrand, a
like
rebrand.
he had the gay men's choir at his funeral, right? So he, you know, he created all sorts of different ministries. The rebranding was, you know, brilliantly diabolical, you know.
And why I bring this issue up, and it's not, and I want to get your reaction to this, is why I bring it up, and it's not to scapegoat. I go to the LA Rec, the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, and I've been going for the last few years. I mean, I've been like, you know, I've been back to the church for 20 years, and I've probably been going for the last 10.
Mhm.
And I got interested in going because they have LGBT
Yeah.
sessions. Probably the most famous speaker they've had on that topic is
Was
James
you?
Martin.
Oh,
No, are you kidding?
they never have you, right?
No, are you kidding? Oh my God, I can barely get through the door.
He's arrived. He's arrived. He's on the property. Heads up, everybody.
Yeah, so I go to these LGBT sessions,
Yeah.
and I get particularly anxious when they start talking about children
Hmm.
and sexuality
Hmm.
and sexual identity.
Hmm.
Number one, the Catholic Church over the past, let's say, 20 years has such a bad record on this issue. Why
Hmm.
on earth is anybody at a Catholic conference talking about children and sexual identity?
Identity.
It,
Well,
it's
it's
a bad,
outrageous. It's outrageous, and it's, you know, they have to be part of the secular culture, right? They want to be accepted by it, but it's this lessening of standards, lessening of morality. It's the, you know,
it's
a
just
lot.
bad optics, Elizabeth.
It's
It's,
horrible,
yeah, it's, come on.
but it's more than just optics, in my opinion.
Oh, it is. It is.
It's the agenda is being infiltrated, you know, through the curriculum and through the teaching and, you know, through the events and conferences.
I'd like to read you this. This was from the 2018 LA Rec, and this was a Catholic priest. So
Mhm.
he's talking to priests, religious, Catholic educators, DRE,
Yeah,
CCD teachers,
yeah,
and these people are all going back to their parishes and their
yes,
dioceses, and they're
right.
going to disseminate all this. Yeah, scary. So he said, part of our question as we walk this journey is, do we understand what this is about, sexual identity? The way in which a person sees themselves in terms of who they are romantically and sexually attracted to. Now, some people don't even have that when they are 50 years old. We know that some people, as second and third graders, have that,
Oh,
and they begin to
Jesus.
identify with either what is normative or, from their perspective, what is normative. And they just dress differently from what you expect. They
Mm.
speak differently, and they identify themselves in a world that is unto themselves. And we are called to journey with them and affirm them in that journey.
Well, it's, you know, first of all,
So
it's
he's talking
garbage.
about
Sex. Yeah.
7-year-olds.
And it's our identity is the primary identity is sex, right? That's what they're saying, the sexual orientation of these children. First of all, the whole psychological importance of keeping children as innocent as possible, to allow the imagination and the personality to develop without the imposition of the, sexual, the sexual confusion, the sexual moray. I mean, just, it's children need to be children. But this pushing of children into sexualization at a very early age, introducing, the minority views, hopefully minority views to children. It's forcing them to identify as sexual beings long before psychologically, physically, they are should be even looking at these issues. So it's lessening their ability to be children, so that, my argument is always, the quicker we can have children as sexual beings, the quicker we can say, we can lower the age of consent. We can, further children is sexualizing children, have children being involved in sexual activity, and then they have achieved their goal. And it's a very short step to the sexual, this, whether you call it pedophilia, whatever you call it, but the sexualization of children with adults, that children are sexual beings, and that it is a puritanical, this is the argument, a puritanical society that, thinks that children can't engage in sex with an adult.
And
That's
it's
where
not,
we're headed if we're
yeah,
not
and
there.
it's not just a sexual identity, it's an LGBT identity, sexual identity. And this, I think it's more complicated because at this presentation, they were more specific, and it was about identifying a possible LGBT child, saying that, they're sometimes alienated from other children, maybe they're not doing well in school, there's a specific profile that they were advocating, and that was me when I was a kid, and that's why it really disturbed me.
Well, it's very insidious, isn't it?
Yeah, and then they were making certain recommendations, like this is to an adult, to befriend that child, to gain their trust, and then to begin to, confirm
Explore.
them and affirm them in their sexual identity. Now, there are possibly, very well-intentioned and good adults that would be involved in something like this. But as far as I'm concerned, that's a blueprint for an abuser.
You bet.
Thank you.
And Joseph, abusers go where they have access to children, which is school, which is sports, so giving this kind of permission, to pursue the discussion of sexuality with children unrelated to, to you, is just insidious and a recipe for disaster. And it's not talking about children's potential, children's spirituality, children's intellectual and emotional development. It's about, this. If they're shy, then they must be, have some, LGBT tendencies. If they, if they can't get along with kids, it's blamed on that, right? I was a shy kid, that was my nature, but you'd never know it now, but it was true. So to me, it's just because, this reminds me of Ted McCarrick talking to James Grine, the 11-year-old boy, saying to him, I love you. God loves you. God wants you to do this. It's all right. This is, sanctioned, this behavior sanctioned by God. It's what we were talking about previously. It is, the isolating of the child from, their family, and then affirming them in their, in their abuse. And then make the child complicit. And also, we know kids are the power of suggestion to children, right? Is something that should be, very careful. Parents should be very careful about the power of suggestion to children, as well as we know that children, especially when they get into teens, experiment, are risk takers. So laying this foundation, in my mind, of doing all sorts of suggestion of going down a very dangerous path. And now it's transgenderism. They're going to be mutilated at age 8 and 9 without the parents permission, or with one parent's permission and not the other. So it's we're in really dangerous territory.
Right. And then at that same session, the priest said, and he was talking about those who are involved in LGBT ministries in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He said, some of our people are going to parishes specifically or schools to create an honest dialogue. So they're going, to talk about this. And then he said, our Bishop Gomez is the director of our ministry, and that's Archbishop Jose Gomez, who is the USCCB president right now.
Yes.
Yeah. And then this priest recommended a clear public policy that says this place affirms, teaches, affirms students that identify, and we want to find a place to accompany them. I don't think the Catholic Church should be accompanying any children in terms of their sexual identity, not with the history of abuse that
No, and that's what I would, yes, stay away. Okay, here are the buzzwords, people, and this is why, children should be taught critical thinking, accompany, dialogue, mercy, affirming. Those are buzzwords used to impose, stinking thinking is what, to impose this, ability to not think critically, not to protect children, to all in the, and Francis does this repeatedly, repeatedly accompany them, merciful, be merciful. And if you don't think a certain way, then you're unmerciful, right? You're, unloving.
Right.
So it's the language, as you know, better than I, the language is very deceitful as well as deceptive. And it has to be, we have to be educating our kids on, this language of deceit. What is it? What does this mean? For example, the Pope's always talking, we're going to end poverty. Well, you can have utopia in this world. No, our job, there is no utopia in this world. Our job is to, and the priest's job is to get us to heaven, is to save our souls. That's it. That's it. And as teachers, it is to teach the faith and to educate children to be the best that they can be in their intellectual and emotional potential. And critical thinking has gone out the window, I'm afraid.
Right. And at the LA Rec, I don't know if you're familiar with this graphic. It's called the Genderbred person.
No,
okay.
Well,
there's
so.
There's the gender unicorn, which is more famous. But then I think the genderbred person is more nefarious because it specifically targets children. And it's all about fluidity. And they were advocating, in terms of gender or sexuality. And they were advocating this at 2 Catholic educators.
This drives me crazy, because if anybody thinks that the abuse crisis is going to be over, right? Or that, children will not, we've evolved, we know how to protect children, stranger danger. Well, we should be telling them about these tricks that they're teaching, these training sessions. That's what should be told. I mean, to me, this is just a recipe for disaster.
I almost think that the abuse in the Catholic Church has now become institutionalized.
Yeah.
In terms of these sort of grooming sessions.
It's exactly what they, yeah. And it's been going on since 1929 when Bella Dodd, was directed by Moscow, the communists, to place communist priests into the seminary and homosexuals. So it's been going on generation of generation. And now we've kind of hit our exponential limit of communists, homosexuals in the priesthood, the recruiting, it's the funneling of, victims, are, McCarrick was a classic example, right? His victims came into the seminary. And by the way, those men that I talked to in 2005 and 6, all of them were promised a college education in the seminary paid for by their predator.
Mm.
All of them.
I want to return to that year of 2018 again. And I think I'm kind of a naive person.
Oh, I don't think
but,
so.
but I think that's why I've gotten into a lot of trouble over my life, is I'm very
rusty.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I think I've learned my lesson because I've been hit so many times, especially with clergy and the hierarchy. But I mean, in 2018, and that Vegana Letter came out, I really thought that I really thought it was going to be a beginning of a renewal for the church, that a lot of these things were going to be cleaned up. And I thought Pope Francis was going to resign. I remember after reading the Vegana Letter, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's also gone through a lot of the same stuff I have, and I said, gosh, I give him a week or two. I just think this is so explosive. This is so damning. I just don't know how he can pot on how wrong I was. So you wrote this. You wrote this article in 2018. You wrote, during the decades of clerical sex abuse in America, cowardice, conniving, immorality, and cover-up dominated the episcopacy. Once the screaming headlines vanished, it was back to business as usual. Devastated and disgusted millions left the Catholic Church. Nothing changed. Homosexual predation populated the clerical ranks in America, the world, and the Vatican.
Yeah, I think, that's the saddest thing of all. I mean, the devil obviously is masterful the way he designed this. And I too thought, oh, surely this is a moment in time where the Pope is, in the face of truth, which it was just brutal truth. But this is my working belief. In many respects, I feel like the church has been abandoned by this Pope, taking us down the globalist route, and a lot of other things. But God's left us with Vigano, and Vigano has doubled down. He, it's now almost bi-weekly that he's either sending letters to the church faithful, to Trump. He's drafting prayers. He continues to his response to the McCarrick report was, and frankly, Joseph, I'm like, where is everybody? This was historic. I mean, first of all, he referred to Francis as the Argentine, or Bergoglio, which, and he hinted that, the coup d'etat of Benedict was orchestrated by the deep state, the intersection of the deep state church and the deep state. To me, he is unrelenting, and he has this incredible worldview of both politics and the spiritual life of the church, with this unrelenting, adherence to the truth. And so to me, although, I mean, that letter was, rip the Band-Aid off. There's we can't go back after that. And he was right about everything. He was right about McCarrick. He was right about Francis. Excuse me, I'm just going to decline. Right about Francis, and what was going on there. So I think, evil is so entrenched right now in the church that it's not going to do the right thing. But as we go through this crucible of the church, we have the truth telling of Vigano.
What I
And
worry about, what I worry about him though is that I think he's been kind of dismissed by the mainstream media as kind of
oh,
like the Catholic version of Alex Jones. You
right,
know, he's a conspiracy theorist, and that's it.
right, yeah. But the the mainstream media has done as much as the Catholic Church to cover up the clergy abuse scandal and to cover up the sexual abuse scandals all over this country. The media has been complicit as the Catholic Church. When it suits their interest, then and only then will they blow the whistle. They knew, the Washington Post, they knew about McCarrick for years. He was, that was not a secret. Um, so they can say what they want. Where I get my consolation and my ability to carry on, to speak and write out against what I see happening in this church, is from Vigano.
Yeah.
And I would hope that others would, because he's not just saying, here's the political skinny people, this is what's really, he's also saying, but this is what you have to do to stay close to Holy Mother Church. I mean, it's never happened. I mean, maybe Athanasius way back in, whatever century that was, but in, St. Peter Damian, but this has been, for me, this has been that light in the darkness. And I don't care what the mainstream, I don't listen to the mainstream. They're totally corrupt to the core. So, and I'm hoping that and I know he's bringing people back to the faith. And I know that he is evangelizing Christians who aren't Catholics to the faith. I'm seeing that in kind of the political circles.
You wrote this, Elizabeth. Vigano unleashed a growing restlessness, a militant resistance movement of faithful Catholics determined to restore the church to purity, fidelity, and the sacred. Now that this bronze door is opened, it will never be closed, despite the concerted effort of a complicit pontiff. Ultimately, the laity must demand that the reign of Francis I and his current of malefactors end in ignominy. You still believe that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
I don't see that push amongst the laity at all.
You don't, look what you're doing. Look what you're doing. You cannot underestimate the impact of your work and your truth. You cannot, because you are standing there in the face of this, tsunami, but you're not going to budge. And people recognize what you say is truth. Truth is much more powerful than, the quote unquote vicar of Christ, or, the Holy See and all its billions. And so
What
I don't,
Elizabeth, I'm sorry. What I see a lot of times is a mentality in a lot of the Catholic laity of a battered spouse, that it's like, oh, look at Francis. He just did this wonderful thing. It's like semi-Catholic.
yeah, yeah.
And then it returns to abuse. And people, it's this back and forth, and people, it's a brainwashed mentality. I think, and I've been in it a long time too, because
Well,
my abuse in the Catholic Church went beyond just what happened to me when I was 16. It happened not in that fashion, but in other
yeah,
ways later. And
yeah,
it's hard to break that mindset, because people honestly believe that the Catholic Church is one holy Catholic and apostolic church, and it's the only route to salvation, and they gotta stay. And so
yeah,
a lot of times they're willing to put up with a level of abuse, not personal abuse in
yeah.
terms of them, but just of what they're complicit in, or at least tolerating. That is really,
Hmm.
it's pretty unbelievable. It's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, um,
Do you know what I'm
I
saying?
know exactly what you're saying. Although I think the closer you get to a deeper prayer life, and sacramental life, the more you see what Francis is really all about, not going to tolerate it. Look, I don't know how he's going to be exposed or deposed, and if he is, but I know at this point, because of the American church and the people who have pushed back criticizing him, and it's been largely the Americans. It has, not the bishops, few priests, mostly the laity.
Mm.
Mostly the laity. When a New York Times writes a report on Francis, they always say, "Oh, and then there's this dissident, critical part of the church, that thinks he's a globalist, that thinks he's embracing modernism in the UN." I think that's success. And it's only going to get worse because he is going to expose himself for what he is if people don't see. I mean, the evangelicals say to me, "Liz, he's a Marxist. It's very obvious." And, we were grown up to, he's the vicar of Christ. We can't never criticize the Pope. And, well, at my age, I've kind of, and we've had some great popes as I was growing up. And so this was kind of a leap that I had to, but because God gave me a rational mind, and keeping close to the Blessed Mother and to praying, I don't feel like I am being a turncoat or being disloyal.
Right. I want to talk to you about, I hope I pronounce it. This was a difficult article that you wrote for me to get through, just because, not because of the way it was written or anything, but because of the subject matter. It's called "The Boys of Gorta."
Gorta in Ireland. It's
Ireland.
Yeah.
Could you just tell everybody just really quick?
Well, it was based on, the story I just told you, my experience in interviewing clergy abuse victims from, 30 to 60, 70 years old, learning so many victims commit suicide. And it's kind of the untold story in my mind. And what happened in this particular parish in Ireland, and I think it was Donegal, is that a number of there was a predatory priest or priest, a number of these boys were abused, and I believe it was 8 boys committed suicide in this one little parish. And their, headstones are in Christ the King Cemetery. And to me, that, because as I was investigating these cases, that to me was the kind of the gut punch of all gut punches. That, and so many, and people would say, their mother doesn't even know, their parents don't even know that they were abused. They think it was something else. I know he was abused, and that's why he committed suicide. I mean, that's what the friends would say. So there is this, it is soul murder. This is soul murder. And these young men cannot get their heart around the fact that this man of God, representing God, did this to them. And in many respects said what McCarrick said to James Grine, this is, God wants you to do this. This is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. And so my message is that the abuse of children is so heinous, and is one that they've lost. The trauma has caused them to lose all hope. And I thought that cemetery and that story in Gadahork, Ireland, I'm 100% Ireland, that just, I know how Catholic Ireland is, and because of the clergy abuse scandal, nobody's going to church anymore. The faith is dead in Ireland. And so anyway, that of all the things that I've written, really, that's the one that I hope people really take to heart, because pray for victims of clergy abuse, of all abuse, that have committed suicide. I know there is a merciful God, and I'm sure they're forgotten.
I want to read a couple of passages that really struck me as incredibly powerful. You wrote, "Clerical sex abuse is soul murder. The body and soul are violated by the predator priest. Nothing remains but a brittle and broken shell of a person. And then you wrote, the unique and heinous spiritual abuse perpetrated upon clerical sex abuse victims robs these children of hope and escape. Their world is turned upside down with God, not as their savior, but as their tormentor. This was really profound that you wrote this, because this is I don't know, maybe everybody thinks that their story is unique, but this is something that I went through, because the priest that had groomed me had told me, that I was born gay and God made me gay. And and later in life, I really did look at God as quite sadistic, because he had made me this way.
Yeah.
And what's scary is this is a line of thinking or misthinking that runs through the church and continues today, because there's this, I can't tell you how many times I see it in social media being espoused by people in the Catholic Church, that God made people a certain way. And when it was said to me, it was said privately in a parked car between me and a priest in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But now it's said openly.
Yeah. Right.
To children. And then you had somebody like the Jesuit John J. McNeil that said, gay people believe that they were born this way and God made them this way, and they would rather see the church's teachings as wrong, and rather than see God as sadistic. It's very sick, because it's something that is still, there's this germ that's still in the church, and I think it's still being used. I think it's being used more selectively, more thoughtfully, but it's also being used on a more widespread level, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I agree completely. It's because we're not allowed to have this discussion, right, Joseph? We're not allowed to talk about, the trauma that children endure. We're not allowed to talk about suicide. We're not allowed to talk about AIDS. We're not allowed to talk about alcoholism, substance abuse. Can't talk about it. It's all, just disappeared, right? You can't talk about that. Any of the consequences of, and I think it's really widespread. I mean, I have heard that and seen that on social media. And I mean, I think of this boy whose father was a Chicago fireman. His father was killed. He was 11 years old, killed in a Chicago fire. His mother saw that he was lost, lost his father, who was such a strong presence, took him to the parish priest, to, mentor him, to be a father figure to him, right? Father figure to him. And of course, the priest abused this boy when he is so vulnerable. And of course, the boy committed suicide, a number of years later. But it's just like, this is, why can't we tell these stories? Why can't we look at the boys in Gorf and say, never again? And, why can't we return, the church when priests were really fathers, protective fathers, teaching the faith?
We can't say it because even somebody like me, who's a survivor, was involved, lived in the gay community. I'm called homophobic in the Catholic Church, not in the secular culture. In the Catholic Church, I'm called homophobic.
It's just the devil at work.
I don't. Yeah.
So.
And I wanted to, you might know about these statistics, but when I was in the gay community, I had a lot of anecdotal sort of, I don't want to say evidence, but because I had talked to a lot of guys, and they didn't call it sexual abuse, and I didn't categorize or look at what happened to me when I was 16 as sexual abuse for most of my life.
Yeah.
That's why I think a lot. I was 16. That's why I think a lot. I think the cases of sex abuse, especially involving boys and young men, are really underreported.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Because I think a lot of people don't, like me, it doesn't register as sex abuse, or they just don't want to talk about it. Men don't want to talk about that. But going back, in the gay community, I found that a lot of my friends and people that I knew had had sexual experiences when they were minors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This was a study done. 46% of homosexual men, in contrast to 7% of heterosexual men, were molested by someone of the same sex as children.
Mm-hmm.
Almost half.
Yeah, I would guess it's even higher. You know, as a lawyer, you know, people come into my office, you know, as counselor, and time again, because I was, you know, in child abuse, I would hear these stories, men and women who were homosexual, but then told their childhood story. And I never met anybody who hadn't been abused, you know, and many of the times the abuse that they were talking about was the first time they had ever told anybody. Do you think that was, you know, there was a guy at the end of our block who did that. You know, they don't even want to look at it. And the impact of that, you know, on their sexual development. So I think for me, it's kind of my own experience was in talking to people, you know, as a lawyer. I found it to a person that they had been sexually abused as a child.
And then there's another study. It's called The Impact of Sexual Abuse on Sexual Identity Formation in Gay Men.
Mm-hmm.
And this was from the abstract. They wrote, emerging data suggests that as children, gay males have an increased risk for physical and sexual abuse. Anecdotal evidence suggests that a significant subset of children abused by clergy identify as gay as
Mm.
adults.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And for parents who are watching this, I interviewed a serial predator who had, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children, and his preference was 13-year-old boys, 11 to 13. And he said to me, you know, Liz, I can be walking down the street, and if 13-year-old boys walking together or passing me, I can look at them, not say a word to them. I know what boy is vulnerable and what boy I can abuse without any problem. And this is what parents need to know, is that they have that, you know, that instinctive ability to, you know, assess what child is vulnerable or weak, and how to hone in on them, what to say, what to do. You know, they obviously trade you know, predators trade information back and forth, children back and forth for that matter. You know, according to Grine, McCarrick and Bernadine, you know, they passed him back and forth. So it's, you know, you never know. It's the you know, the charming, glib, funny, you know, generous Cardinal McCarrick that is a monster, right? It's, you know, yeah, the one with the gleam in his eye, the little leprechaun, a monster. Um, and you know, it's and you know, how do you, that's why raising children and giving them the ability to have confidence, the ability to develop their talents and intelligence, both emotional talents, intellectual intelligence, helps them, gives them that protective cover, you know, from being abused and being you know, frankly, being hyper vigilant. But so I mean, you know,
This is where I think it gets, what's really dark, and it gets really dark for me in particular, because, and I've tried to make this argument. I don't think predation or sexual abuse in the Catholic Church has stopped one bit. I think it's changed forms a bit. I think it's more difficult for a priest or a layperson or a prelate or anybody to abuse a minor child. I think it would be a more difficult thing to happen now. But I think they've and predators are crafty. They can change their, you know this more than I, they can change their tactics. And I think they've changed. I think they're going to target possibly minors who they perceive as being LGBT.
Yes.
Because I think they can get away with it. I think they think they can groom them and convince them that it's not abuse. But I think they're also going to do that with vulnerable adults as well. And this is where I think Pope Francis is really kind of frightening, because I think he gives dog whistles. Now in 2013, he blows dog whistles. I think he said that famous "Who am I to judge?" quote. But what's disturbing about that, in the mainstream media, you don't hear it or read it. It's not placed in context. He was asked about that Monsignor Rica. Who, I mean, I read some things about him, but what really bothered me was the quote was with a youth known by local police. This was in Uruguay.
Right.
And I
caught in an elevator, with this youth, a boy prostitute, and I don't like to use that word, or and he was notorious, and thrown out, I believe, of the nuncio in Uruguay because of his conduct. Now he's in charge of the Santa Marta household, the hotel where everybody stays, and the Vatican Bank.
But the Pope is saying, well, that kind of sex abuse is okay. Who am I to judge concerning that?
A boy, underage, a vulnerable child. He supposedly cares about human trafficking. Those are the very children that are trafficked. It's a trafficking victim, and but the Rica thing, once that happened, Joseph, once I saw that, I was like, that's it.
When Pope Francis really lost me, and he lost me for good, again, was in 2018. Juan Carlos Cruz.
Yeah, I know Juan. I know him very well.
Yeah, I to me, he's quite a heroic person. But he had a meeting with Pope Francis. And this is where Francis lost me for good.
I know what you're going to say.
And because I have no reason to doubt Juan Carlos Cruz. He's always been heroic and truthful. I don't think he has any reason to spin or tell tales.
No, he doesn't.
He said, because as with everything Pope Francis says off the cuff, there's always this, well, did he say it? No, he didn't say this. It's not what he meant. Juan Carlos Cruz said that the Pope told him, God made you like this.
Yes.
God made you like this, meaning a homosexual. Yeah. And then, of course, on May 19, 2018, James Martin, who just was doing a speed dance, over there. He wrote on Twitter, Pope Francis, quote, God made you gay, unquote. I said, I'm done, because this is what my abuser said to me. And I said, I'm done.
Yeah.
Done with this freak show, this sideshow, this horror.
It is.
You don't tell an abuse victim that.
No.
And I don't care how they self-identify. That's fine. That's between them and God, and that's their personal business. But I would never go up to someone and say, hey, God made you this way.
Right.
That's not for me to say, and that's not for the Pope to say.
No, it isn't. And Juan Carlos, was abused. The Pope continued to protect Bishop Barros, and called the people, the great people of Chile were unrelenting, Joseph. They were we have got to get rid of this bishop. They would protest, they were unrelenting. They were all over law enforcement in Chile. And finally, they were right. Remember, Francis called them stupid. Right. Called those people. They even went to St. Peter's and confronted the Pope. I just see, those are the things that you know, the little people, the lay people can really make a difference. They got rid of this bad bishop, even though he was protected for 2, 3 years by Francis. I don't know how long. And then finally Francis had to relent. And he was, he was a guy who had, you know, had witnessed Juan Carlos's abuse. So I'm with you. I mean, that to me was, and I had every reason to believe Juan Carlos. He was telling the truth. And, you know, Francis is, but he plays to the mainstream media, right? And
But I think he honestly believes that.
I suppose so.
Why else would he say it? Why else would he say it?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think he believes that God makes certain people homosexual, and that a lot of gay men, almost half, have been sexually abused, oftentimes by clergy, priests. That has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Isn't that convenient? Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it? So anyway, very troubling. But this is the conversation we need to continue having. I agree completely with you that it's the abuse has just shifted.
Yeah.
While the heat's on, it's shifted. And it's going to continue until every single one of them is out of the priesthood and episcopacy.
If you have time, do you have time for just a few questions about the McCarrick report?
Sure.
Okay. One of the Rod Dreher, you mentioned him earlier.
Yes.
He wrote an article called "How the Lavender Mafia Works."
Yeah.
It's a good article.
Yeah.
And he talked about Richard Sipe, the late priest. And I mean, one of the interesting points I think that Richard Sipe had made, and then Rod Dreher makes in the article, that I hadn't really thought about, that it's not a good idea for men who identify as homosexual to enter the Catholic priesthood, because even if they want to be chaste and are, good of heart in that, they'll be compromised and be lured into sexual act. It's really insane. I thought that was an interesting point that I've
heard a lot of that. Yeah, I have heard a lot of stories like that.
Because it's in the McCarrick report as well. There's that priest 1, 2, 3, 4. If people aren't familiar, they're not named, but those priests in the report that's how they're listed. Yeah. And priest 1 was by the psychologist. This priest 1 was preyed upon by McCarrick. And the psychologist, I wrote this down as a quote. He's a somewhat passive young man. That's what you talked about, where predators are able to identify those who.
Yeah. Can you imagine McCarrick, how skilled he was?
Yeah. And then priest number 4, this was really shocking to me. And I hate to say it, it's because it's what happened to me as well. Not exactly like this, but I had been abused as a 16-year-old. Later in life, confided in a priest about that, and then he befriended me, and then he, not sexually assault, he made a pass at me, he propositioned me. And then,
oh my God,
priest number 4 had made accusations against McCarrick. He was taken to, this is on page 73. So Monsignor Gambino arranged for priest 4 to meet with Father Edward Zogby, S.J., a counselor who was affiliated with Fordham University. After the counseling, which also involved taking priest 4's confession, oh God, Father Zogby wanted to give priest 4 a hug and then tried to kiss him and sexually assaulted him.
Yeah, I mean, so abuse upon abuse upon abuse.
And I thought what happened to me was unusual. And then I read this and I was like, this is not good.
No, you're re-victimizing vulnerable victims again and again. And just, I mean, I know. I've, heard stories like that. It's.
And priest 4 stated that the long-term corrosive effect of his experience had led had less to do with the physical violations and much more to do with the way it profoundly undermined his trust in the bishops. And that's I have to say that's true with me. He wrote, the priest number 4, I spoke up at the time, and I think that if I had been listened to, things might have been different. I have what I believe to be justifiable anger and frustration because what happened to me makes it difficult for me to trust bishops, and I know that many other priests feel the same way. Bishops hold so much power over us, and it is so easy for them to turn our lives upside down without just cause. This is real clericalism, the kind of power that may prevent others from coming forward. Bishops need to understand that someone like me is a victim too and needs to be listened to, understood, and taken seriously. I just don't think the bishops are hearing it. They're just not hearing it. I've gone, I won't name them, but I've gone to certain bishops here, and I've let them know if I ever knew of anything that had to do with minors, I'd call the police right away. But
Right.
I've seen things in parishes involving adults that it looks like predation and it looks like grooming to me. And maybe I have a keener eye for that because I've experienced it. And I've told the bishops, I said, this is really a problem. I said, it might be an illegal problem right at this moment, but I think you really need to address it, and they don't.
No, they don't. And it may not be a legal problem at that point. It could evolve to a legal problem, but we're also talking about, we know the end product is the loss of faith. That is, and that to me, on top of the physical abuse, is, when they're in the business of saving souls, not chasing them away from the church.
Because there are still, like I talked about in those sessions at the LA Rec, there are still vulnerable people that the Catholic Church is actively seeking out. And there are vulnerable people who, for whatever reason, I was one of them, are seeking out the Catholic Church as well. And I'm concerned about what kind of ministry or treatment they're going to find.
Well, you are a gift to the Catholic Church in ways that, Vegana is. And I've often talked to people about your work because you're, an irrefutable expert. And the fact that you have seen and gone through it and can educate all of us, because we're getting it from the media, from, the liberal bishops, from the Pope. And you're that wall that is pushing back. And that witness that we haven't had in the church at all. And so it's absolutely critical that, you continue to do that.
I do not advise people that identify as LGBT to seek counsel in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Because I think the record speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of parents who contact me who have children who identify as LGBT, and I do the same thing. It's very concerning. I don't think the Catholic Church on this issue is reliable or trustworthy.
No, I agree completely. And they don't have a track record. They're going to be more McCarrick's that were right under our noses, right? We're going to see it. It'll maybe be a different, in a different kind of, medium, but it will happen. That's why you have to continue to write and speak out. I'm sure, I'm sure that this is the kind of movement that you can build within the Catholic Church to clean it up. It's the only way.
I want to I always like to end things on a hopeful note. I am not hopeful because the Catholic Church is not a democracy. It's a top-down organization. Let's just say on the local level, like I've never gone like you have to the Vatican and been more on an international scale. I mean, I've been pretty local to my diocese and archdiocese. And I know you have to get the bishop interested and involved. And if they don't care, it's over. It's pretty much over.
Well, you
can scream and yell, and I can put things on blog, and I can write, and I can ask people to call
Joseph, you're
the
not local. You are
archdiocese.
national
Okay.
and international. You are. But you're right. You're right. But if you can educate the laity, then you're taking huge leaps forward at changing the culture. Culture is not going to be changed by the bishops. Culture is going to be changed by faithful Catholics who respond to your message.
I'm not interested. I'm not so concerned about the secular culture. It is what it is. I'm more concerned about the culture within the church.
Yeah, that will change. That will change because of you.
Okay. Now, where do you, on this issue, where do you see hope? I think I know what you're going to say. You're going to say with the laity, because I think specifically I see it in Catholic fathers.
Yeah.
I think there's been so many good men that are coming forward and just saying enough is enough is enough. You're not going to do this to our sons or our daughters. Enough is enough.
Right.
So I was curious about.
Strong Catholic families is the key. Strong Catholic parents, primarily fathers, are the ones who can protect their daughters and their sons. They have that male instinct, protective instinct, and we have minimized it, demoralized it, neutered it, and that's got to end because they're the only ones that can protect children from predation, and the predators are growing exponentially, in my opinion. So but you've provided a real insight into this world, so that people can become educated and can not be afraid to speak out. And that's what happens when truth is exposed, like you have done. So that's why I have hope. And that's why I was so excited to talk with you. I'm like, oh, Joseph, he wants to talk to me?
Are you kidding?
Oh,
No. When you said, because sometimes I just say, there's people I want to speak to. Let me just see. I'll reach out to her, and I go, she's probably too busy, or whatever. And then you said yes, and I was like, oh, right, bucket list. Okay, one other.
Oh, stop. You're my bucket list. You're a beautiful writer. I'll pray for you.
Thank you.
I know the Blessed Mother is watching over you and guiding your work, which is so important for the salvation of the church.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Joseph.
God bless you.
Thank you. It's great talking to you.